So I know there's a lot of hype going on in the AI world. I think it's flooding all the events, all the LinkedIn messages, all everything feels like it's AI related. But obviously you are deep in this space. So I'd love to hear more about your experiences, what's working, what's not working, and really moving behind the hype.
Yeah. So obviously, as someone who's representing a service provider who's enabling organizations of different sizes, scale, different industry verticals, etc., I do get bird's eye view of what's really happening in this space. And I would put it in context of a country like India, which is probably the perfect microcosm that you could get, right? The complexity, diversity, all that seem like challenges for something like AI when you look at it from a data angle. And at the same time, also a country that has got builders, consumers, so it's got a large market in itself, but it's also got the tech builder ecosystem. So talent to really build technologies or leverage technologies like AI exist. And last but not the least is it's got a huge market which is ready to consume, right? As in if I can build a solution, and we've got great examples in a country like India, which is UPI, which is the transaction gateway that we use to actually transfer money, and which is now pretty much used by millions of users in the country and all in digital form. In fact, we are probably, I think the last number that I heard, we are now at almost 18 billion UPI transactions per month. Okay. That's the kind of scale that India can achieve as a consumer market.
Hmm.
So it definitely is the perfect microcosm or ecosystem that you could have to study very closely and see where it's going. And it's been a year, and I would, if I just touch upon how I've seen this space changing. Right in the beginning, customers were very unsure, and most of them were just experimenting and piloting. Okay. And most of that was driven by this whole fear of missing out. And this was largely the buzz that was created as a result of ChatGPT taking off. And everyone wanted to use generative AI. And most of them ended up being pilots or POCs of generative AI use cases. That time, the approach was let me see if I can do something with AI. That's how most of them started the journey. Where I clearly see now the market kind of settling into is I want to first pick up the right problem statement to solve because that's worth solving. And with AI, I can fundamentally rethink how to solve it, which wasn't possible earlier. So that's another reason why I would look at using AI to solve that particular use case. And the third thing that I'm clearly seeing with customers is unlike earlier, where they would just depend on service providers to tell them how to leverage AI or generative AI, now they're investing in building data science teams in-house and saying, I want a team in-house who will actually educate me and help me make the right decision if based on what I have as my data and input, based on the problem statement that I have identified, can AI solve this the way it would be meaningful to my business? And that's been the evolution and change that I've seen in a market like India in just the last 12 months. And I think that's great because that's exactly how AI has to really create its impact. Customers as well as internally, that we should stop looking at AI as a technology tool. It isn't. It is fundamentally a framework that can help you rethink how you can build new products, business models, business processes, even unlock more productivity and value from your talent pool, by the way. That requires a cultural mindset change. And I think that's another aspect that I'm clearly seeing. There is a lot to be done there, though. The cultural mindset change. I think that's probably the biggest barrier to AI being able to unlock value for users and organizations. But I would expect that to change because there will be some of these breakout organizations. I've already seen some very good examples of customers where they are thinking of this strategically and they say they've created a complete business unit, brought together cross-functional teams into a unit, which is actually helping them think how to leverage AI. And I think that's a great approach to start off with because that can then drive a lot of the cultural mindset changes and then hence behavior on what we do, how we do, and so on and so forth. Those have been some of my observations in the field as I've been speaking with customers and users, both who are building with AI or building AI or trying to consume AI to benefit themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. And so I've got two follow-up questions, one of which you mentioned is the cultural mindset. Would love to hear what are some ways in which you've helped maybe customers overcome that? or guiding them in the right direction? And the second part question maybe answer later on is the use cases. So I'd love to hear what kind of use cases are working and what kind of use cases are not working when it comes to AI.
A great question. So when we started off, our approach was more because we actually provide infrastructure platform on which then customers can actually build their AI. So initially, when we started off, our approach was more around, hey, here's an alternative way of how you could build your AI environments. But we realized that that really didn't help us accelerate conversations with customers. And we realized the biggest friction point was the fact that it was adding to the confusion because there's already a lot of confusion on what all can AI do. The technology itself is changing at such a fast pace. There's just a ton that's being thrown at customers as users, saying that you could do this, you could do this is another thing that is available, and so on and so forth. And we realized the best approach to take was actually take a step back with every customer and say, hey, let's get to the drawing board first. And we started our conversations with discovery workshops instead of trying to say, let me give you technology that you can start using. I think that helped a lot in beginning with this cultural mindset change. For the first time, we clearly see that while selling technology, it's a cross-functional team that is involved. It's no more just the tech team, which is the CIO or a CTO org. There are data scientists involved, business folks involved, product folks involved, all of them coming together and identifying what are our big opportunities and problem statements when we do this discovery workshop. And we help them then categorize into what you believe that will take time to solve and is high impact, what will probably take shorter time to solve and has high impact. So basically convert them into a 4 quadrant system. And once that's done, we get them to then go back to the problem statement saying that, okay, what is the kind of data input that you have available to solve for these problems and opportunities? And then figure out, can AI or machine learning in general solve for this in a way that will matter to them? For example, is 100% accuracy super critical? Is it a probabilistic approach or is it a deterministic approach as far as AI is concerned that will solve this for you? What is going to be acceptable that has a meaningful impact? And that's how we help them then identify and shortlist use cases. In this whole process of discovery, we realize a lot of customers realize how they could think differently. So going back to the drawing board and taking a step back rather than getting into execution mode helped a lot in being able to make this cultural shift. So that's answered the first question. Which was the second question, Joe? I want to double click on that too.
Yes, absolutely. We were talking about this before the call. I mostly focus on the first portion, which is the discovery, identifying what you can and can't do with AI. And to your point, going back to specific use cases. The biggest challenge that when I was running AI workshops with corporates, the first question they always tell me is, oh, what kind of tools are available? What tool can do this? What tool can do that? And I said, okay, I can tell you everything. But if it's not going to help you in your role, your organization, or department, why go through it? So I love that you're
Cool.
taking that approach. The second part was around use cases, because I think this
Okay.
is where it's gotten a little bit murky. I think a lot of companies have invested, like you said, they run pilots, but what is actually working in terms of use cases that you've seen? And on the flip side, what are some use cases that you've seen obviously not come to fruition or not work the way it was supposed to be?
Yeah. There's been a range. So the interesting part is customers have been experimenting. And I think those experiments have covered a broad breadth, right? Everything right from predictive analytics to trying to figure out if I can segment my data, content, etc., in a certain way. Can I generate content? And it could be to enable customer experiences or customer conversations and so on and so forth. Or it could be something as simple as I want to run risk and compliance analytics at scale, for example, identifying fraudulent transactions in the case of banks, etc. It's just been a broad spectrum, but I would rather than getting into different kinds of use case segments, I would actually simplify it and say it breaks into 2 parts.
Mhm.
One is which is more external facing, where the organization or the group has to interact with an external stakeholder ecosystem, which is customers or partners and so on and so forth. And the other one is where everything is internal within the group or the organization. So I would say frontline or front end and inside the organization. Most of the organizations or use cases which are focused outward are generative AI first. And they have, I would say, largely seen mixed success because there are a lot of variables which they don't have direct control over. Also what is accepted, because a lot of the benchmarks of what is acceptable comes from their past experiences, which has been largely controlled through human to human interactions. There are certain benchmarks that have been set up. The expectation that AI is going to get everything right from day one, whereas it is a learning process. And how do you set it up right so that you close the feedback loop? All of those are important parts if you really want, especially generative AI, to start getting better in driving the right end outcome. So I've seen mixed success in everything that is outward facing, where there are a lot more variables, which is not in control of organizations. I've seen a lot more success, which is inward facing, which is more focused on, can I optimize my own business processes? Can I get my data to give me better intelligence and insight? Fraudulent transaction detection, and because those are systems where I have complete control. I also have control over analyzing and figuring out how do I use this, rather than just throwing it out to an external stakeholder, which is customers, etc., which I don't have a lot of control over. That's where we have seen a lot more success with customers' use cases. So I would say more backend, where I have a lot more control on all the variables, is where we've seen customers seeing more success. And that's where a lot of the use cases are also accelerating in terms of moving from pilot to production.
I agree completely with that. My experience has been echoed the exact same way. So I have spent a lot of time, and I think where I've seen the biggest success is, like you said, optimizing internally, looking at productivity, efficiency. That has obviously grown exponentially. Once again, on the external side, I'd focus particularly on marketing. You talked about, once again, content generation. Honestly, I have not seen many brands do this very well. Even though all the tools are available, you can create videos, you can create text, but I'll be honest, there's very, very few brands that I've seen actually leverage these effectively. So maybe that's just my experience of a very high bar for content, but I personally have not seen any brands do that very well.
As in, we as a team are also trying to leverage it, and I would say it is tough, Joe. It isn't easy at all, as especially if you are, and I'm talking this now with a marketer's lens, right, and not just someone practicing or selling AI solutions in the market. If you are not thoughtful about how you leverage AI, you will do more harm than good, especially when you look at marketing, especially when it comes to areas like content. Yes, AI does help you expedite, accelerate some of those tactical bits, but this is where your ability to bring in market insight, user insight, tie that in strongly into a framework, which could be a concept, both frameworks like RAGs, as well as your quality checks of how do you improve the content output that's going to come out of a generative AI system, is super critical. And building that up in such a way that it is a scalable, repeatable model and not like a one-time cycle. It's really tough. It's been almost a 12-month journey pretty much ever since I joined Neysa. And I would say if I have to rank our readiness on a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably put us at still a 4.
I appreciate the honesty because I think most executives would probably rank themselves higher, but if you look at the actual output, it's significantly lower. So I'll give you one example, and I want to hear more about the RAGs framework. I have not heard that before. Most recently, I received an email from a Fortune 500 tech company. And it was obviously, the email was very much AI generated. There was tons of emojis. I don't know what model they were using, but it looked like it was like one of my kids did it, for example. And they put this out and they published it to everybody. And I'm just thinking, okay, obviously AI did it, but is there no human intervention involved? Going back to what you said, for me, that damages the brand because it looks like a very unprofessional brand when it's a massive organization. So, yes, that's what I've seen in terms of, once again, it damaging a lot of companies' reputation when it comes to poor quality content. But yeah, I would love to hear more about the RAGs framework. How does that work out?
So that basically is guardrails, right, that you put together specifically. Most of us, especially as marketers, look at AI as what you do based on how the chat GPTs of the world have trained us, which is you open up a window, you prompt, you can fine tune your prompt, etc. Most of us have learned over a period of time to get better at fine tuning our prompts so that we can get better outputs. But you can actually do so much more. You can actually build small agents which manage the entire work. And I'll take content as an example. And I'll take Neysa's example. We are a very young brand, okay? But we are very clear about what our brand stands for, who it is, etc. So the tone of voice how we want our users to experience us when they interact with us is crystal clear. It's articulated clearly. Now, how do I translate that into a framework that acts as a guardrail for my agent that I've created in ChatGPT, where I've created a custom GPT which says, when you're researching for topics, this is the kind of positioning that I want for myself in the eyes of these kind of user personas. And I want you to keep that in mind while researching for topics. It starts right there. Then, when you are diving into create research inputs for me from what's currently trending, what's going on, what are the kind of sources that I want you to look at for sure to bring in insights from? I will again put a guardrail there. How will you structure this content and information for my user depending upon the end format that I want you to put out, which is a white paper, or if it's a blog or an article, and so on and so forth. And what will be the language tone that I will use? Okay. All of this has to be controlled and provided as an input into the overall agent framework. If you haven't, one thing that will happen is if you still have a human in the loop, because most of us will have a human in the loop, someone will check at the end, right? If you've not put this as a system, as a guardrail and a framework into that agent, every time your human will have to keep repeating the checks and balances, edit and multi-edits, etc. You've taken away the advantage of using AI. Okay. However, if you put this guardrail and framework right at the beginning and exists in the overall system, these checks will continue to ensure that that AI agent takes care of most of those nuances, except for where it probably hallucinates. In the case of AI and in the case of generative AI, hallucination is frankly a feature, it's not a bug. It gives you the ability to go in different angles and explore. It will cut down your last human in the loop check drastically. Now, suddenly the system becomes workable and scalable. But if you haven't done this, you're going to always have to deal with it's just thrown me some output. Now I have to keep on improving it. The effort behind it is just crazy. And you've suddenly lost the edge of why you would, as in even leverage something like AI for as something as simple as content development and generation. That is just an example. So that's how setting the guardrails and frameworks and input to what to check for, what is important for me to bring into play, all is important. A lot of us just don't even spend enough time to codify all of this and put it into your AI framework or ecosystem that you're going to leverage for various tasks or processes.
Yes, that's a very good point. I think this is what I try to work with clients on is building those custom instructions, like you said. If you're building a custom GTP, what is the instructions or guardrails, like you said, where it just uses, it remembers that and it can do it time and time again versus you reiterating. I think I've seen that. And you mentioned agents. I think this is one where I've had mixed reactions because there's so much hype between agent mode and ChatGPT and Magnus and so on. Do you see, once again, a lot of the agents fulfilling what they've been doing? So, for example, have you played around with agent mode on ChatGPT? I've had very mixed reactions, but would love to hear how you guys have seen some of these come out.
We haven't still gotten into deploying agents. We are currently using custom developed solutions. Like, for example, one of the problem statements that we are trying to solve is sales enablement. In the B2B tech space, you always had this problem, right? As product marketing and engineering, we put out so much content out there, which technically should help sellers, our customer facing teams to be able to position our solution, sell the value proposition to customers, ensure that we close the loop on answering queries or questions that customers have, help us position ourselves better against competition, all of that stuff. But we always struggle that sales still comes back saying, I need this, I can't find this, or they don't use it. They use messaging different from what you landed out there. We've actually been running a pilot right now, and it's in the process of now moving to production, where we found a ISV partner, an independent software vendor partner, who's actually built a AI agent only for sales enablement. Technically, in the backend, it's a group of tools that work together, but for a user, which is a salesperson or a solution engineer, it's like an assistant that sits with them and based on questions that they ask, right from can I figure out what's my competitive advantage over my competition, this X competition X, to hey, I'm going to meet this customer. Can you quickly put 3 slides together for me that based on what the customer has been talking about as area of focus in terms of AI and our value proposition as a provider, and maybe even stitch together some examples of customers that we've already solved a similar problem for, and it puts together those slides together, and all that they have to do is then transfer it into a deck and then be ready to go and present. So it's a combination of those kind of use cases, but sales enablement is the first area that we picked up because it directly impacts revenue growth for me.
Mm,
Okay, rather than just trying to solve a marketing problem, because
yeah.
I have a lot more control over. But here I'm enabling sales, and then there are a lot more variables. But here's where we've seen that the whole framework of using agents, doing different things, but solving that one common problem, enabling sales to sell better, is something that we've been able to validate that it is something that we can solve with agents.
Absolutely. And this is something I think I've been focusing a lot on is the sales made portion because I agree that is the biggest opportunity. One more question is in terms of you mentioned sales. Have you leveraged it for sales outreach? I know you're on the marketing side, but you kind of have some influence on the outreach side. Do you see AI playing a big role when it comes to outreach, or is it going to be the same old automation like it's always been?
A great question. In fact, this is something that we've been experimenting with to deploy, and this is where I've reached as far as my conclusion is concerned. And when you say outreach, I'm going to use the SDR team as an example, or the inside sales teams as an example,
Yeah.
or cold prospecting. Okay, because that's probably a big chunk of what we do as outreach, right?
Yes.
And as a B2B business. What I have arrived as a conclusion is think of this whole outreach concept like a iceberg, where you see the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is where the interaction or the conversation happens with the prospect at the other end. That part, the actual last mile connection and conversation, for the near future, I continue to see it being human to human, and it is not going to be machine to human. In fact, I would actually say it should never be machine to human because it takes away your ability to build differentiated experiences, and because there's a lot of context at play, etc. But there's a lot of grunt work that goes at the back end, which is the bottom half of the iceberg, which we generally don't see, which a lot of our sales team members spend a lot of time around account profiling intelligence, contact profiling intelligence, mapping my messaging to value proposition to that account, to the contact, even making dials, for example.
Mm.
All of those things can be AI enabled, where AI dials out, sees if you are able to make a right party connection. If I make a right party connection, I connect the human and the human talks to the human. So that's how I see that in outreach specifically, AI will focus on solving all the grunt heavy lifting
Mm.
and continue to enable humans to have better, educated, contextual conversations with other humans. That's how I see this progressing and maturing.
Once again, we have the exact same sentiments here. I like that you mentioned AI enabled rather than AI kind of replacing, because I think this is, once again, a lot of the tech companies are saying, oh my gosh, we're going to replace all your SDRs. And we're going to have, once again, the bots. I think that would be a massive disaster. Once again, could save some money, but the back end, I think it will have a negative impact on most organizations.
It will. Absolutely.
Final question. We have 1 minute left. I would love to get your thoughts on what is one AI opportunity that you think is overhyped and one that you think is underhyped.
Overhyped and underhyped. I don't think so. I have an answer to that question, Joe.
What?
And why it's tough. Every day in the morning when I wake up, I suddenly realize there's something that we can now solve that we could not solve yesterday. And I'll give you my personal experience. My better half, Uttara, she works with a consulting firm and she heads up knowledge management for them in Asia Pacific. And she's part of the core AI strategy group that's kind of enabling deployment of AI in consulting. Knowledge, information, research is gold mine, right? And that's what they built the business on. It is amazing how challenging it is to solve something which seemed like the most core value proposition of AI, right? I should be able to find content, connect context of content, all of that. And this is all sitting within the organization's environment. And still it's complex
Yeah.
because there are so many nuances that you need to bring into play. And I think that will take some time for us to solve systemically as part of the technology solution, which isn't the case today. A
Mhm.
lot of solution providers out there say, hey, you can solve this today out of the box, like
Yeah.
co-pilots, assistants, etc. They don't. They just don't solve it. And but at the same time, as soon as I start going to very niche areas and say, hey, I want, like, for example, I give you the sales enablement example, that is solvable. But that is because it's a very niche use case. You are controlling how you want to solve that particular use case, and then you're able to solve it. So I think the way I see this is a lot of the promise of AI is still going to be seen unfulfilled for a considerable period of time, not because AI can't solve it,
Mm.
more because of how we are looking at what AI can solve and how it should solve.
Once again, I love that answer. I know it's a tough one. I mean, for me, I see it as human capability and human error will always play a role in all these technologies because there has to be a human involved. Sujit, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really enjoyed our chat. And we're going to have to do part two. Would love to hear more about your thoughts on the sales side and leveraging AI. But thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Joe. Lovely
Absolutely.
chatting.
And for everyone watching and listening to today's episode, there's so many golden nuggets in here. Feel free to share with all your colleagues and friends. I'm sure they will learn something new when it comes to AI. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.